The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as we pulled up to our new home, a modest beach house nestled along the golden coast of California. The sky was ablaze with hues of orange and pink, and the sound of waves crashing against the shore filled the air. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the salty breeze, and for the first time in months, I felt a sense of calm. This was supposed to be our fresh start. Laura emerged from the passenger seat, stretching her arms and smiling at me. "It's beautiful, James," she said, her eyes sparkling with the same excitement I'd seen when we first met. I nodded, trying to match her enthusiasm, but my mind was already racing with thoughts of the new job I'd start in a few days. The move had been a leap of faith, a chance to leave behind the stress and strain of our old lives. But as I looked at the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was a temporary reprieve, not a solution. We spent the next few hours unpacking, Laura humming to herself as she arranged our things. The house was small, but it had charm, exposed beams, a fireplace, and, of course, the view. I caught myself staring out the window more than once, captivated by the endless stretch of ocean. Laura noticed and wrapped her arms around me from behind. "You're going to love it here," she whispered, her breath warm against my neck. I turned to face her, forcing a smile. "I know," I said, but deep down, I wasn't so sure. That night, after we'd settled in, we took a walk along the beach. The sand was cool beneath our feet, and the stars twinkled overhead like diamonds scattered across a velvet sky. Laura talked about all the things she wanted to do: explore the local shops, take up painting again, and maybe even learn to surf. I listened, nodding at the right moments, but my thoughts kept drifting back to work. The move was supposed to bring us closer, but I feared it might drive us further apart. As we walked back to the house, Laura squeezed my hand. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, her voice full of hope. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this new life would mend the cracks in our relationship. But as I looked at her, I couldn't ignore the nagging doubt in the back of my mind. The next morning, Laura was up early, eager to explore the town. I stayed behind, buried in emails from work, but I could hear her excitement as she left, the door clicking shut behind her. I tried to focus, but my mind kept wandering back to her, imagining her strolling through the quaint streets, discovering new places. Maybe even making new friends. She returned in the afternoon, her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright. "You'll never guess what I found," she said, practically bouncing with energy. I looked up from my laptop, curious. "There's a surfing club just down the road," she continued. "They offer lessons, and the owner, Dave, is so nice. He said I should come by tomorrow and give it a try." Surfing? Laura had never mentioned an interest in surfing before. But then again, this was California. Maybe it was the place. I thought. Maybe it was bringing out a side of her I hadn't seen before. "That sounds great," I said, trying to sound supportive. "You should definitely give it a shot." The next day, Laura was out the door before I even finished my morning coffee. She spent the entire day at the club, returning in the evening, sun-kissed and glowing. "It was amazing, James," she gushed. "Dave is an incredible teacher. He makes it look so easy, and he's so patient." I couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. It was good to see her happy, to see her finding something she enjoyed. But as the days passed, Laura's trips to the surfing club became more frequent. She spent more and more time there, and I began to notice a change in her. She seemed more distant, more preoccupied. When she talked about the club, it was always about Dave. How skilled he was. How much he'd helped her improve. How fun and relaxed he made everything. At first, I brushed it off. She was just excited, I told myself. It was a new hobby. A new experience. But as the weeks went on, I couldn't ignore the growing unease in my chest. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew it. One evening, as Laura chatted on the phone with a friend, I overheard her mention Dave's name again, this time with a laugh that sounded a little too familiar. I felt a pang of jealousy, followed by guilt. I trusted Laura, didn't I? But the nagging doubt refused to go away. And that was when the first seed of suspicion was planted, a seed that would soon grow into something much darker. Something I wasn't ready to face. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I found the receipt. I had come home early, hoping to surprise Laura with dinner. As I set the table, I noticed her purse sitting on the kitchen counter, slightly open. I wasn't the type to snoop, but something drew me to it. Maybe it was the way she'd been acting lately, or maybe it was just curiosity. Either way, I reached inside and pulled out a small stack of receipts. Most of them were from the grocery store or the local cafe. Nothing unusual. But then I found one from a restaurant I'd never heard of, a fancy seafood place downtown. The date was recent, and the total was higher than what Laura would normally spend on lunch. It was the kind of place you'd go to for a special occasion, or maybe a date. I stared at the receipt for a long time, my mind racing. She hadn't mentioned going out to dinner, and I knew she wouldn't have gone alone. I tried to come up with explanations. Maybe she'd gone with a friend and just forgot to mention it. Maybe it was for work, though that didn't seem likely. But no matter how I tried to rationalize it, the uneasy feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. That evening, when Laura got home, I decided to confront her. I waited until we were sitting down to eat, trying to keep my tone casual. "Hey, I found this receipt in your purse," I said, sliding it across the table to her. "I don't remember you mentioning this place. Did you go with someone from the surfing club?" Laura's eyes flicked to the receipt. And I saw a flash of something in them. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But she recovered quickly, giving me a strange smile. "Oh, that," she said, waving it off. "It was just a lunch with some friends I met at the club. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I didn't mention it." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let it go. But something about the way she said it, the way she avoided my gaze, made my heart sink. I forced a smile, nodding as if I accepted her explanation, but inside, the doubt was growing. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Laura was hiding something from me. The days that followed were tense. I tried to push the incident with the receipt out of my mind, telling myself that I was being paranoid. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more it consumed me. I started paying closer attention to Laura's behavior. How she always seemed to be in a rush when she left for the club, how she avoided talking about her day when she got home, and how she seemed distant even when we were together. Then came the day that shattered any remaining trust I had. It was a Saturday, and Laura had left early for another day at the surfing club. I had planned to spend the day working on a project for my job, but my mind was elsewhere. The unease gnawed at me until I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, not entirely sure what I was going to do but knowing I had to find out the truth. I drove to the surfing club, parking a little way down the road so Laura wouldn't see me. From where I sat, I had a clear view of the entrance. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, watching as people came and went. An hour passed, then another, and I was starting to feel foolish when I saw them, Laura and Dave, walking out of the club together. They were laughing, their heads closed as they talked. I watched as they walked down to the beach, my pulse quickening with every step they took. When they reached the water's edge, Dave turned to her, and I saw them exchange a look that sent a chill down my spine. It was intimate, far more than friendly. And then he kissed her. The world seemed to stop at that moment. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. I watched as Laura kissed him back, as they stood there, oblivious to everything around them, lost in each other. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wanted to storm down there, to confront them, to demand answers. But all I could do was watch. My mind reeling with the betrayal unfolding before my eyes. Eventually, they broke apart and started walking back to the club. I didn't wait to see where they went. I started the car and drove away, my mind a blur of anger, hurt, and disbelief. The image of them together was burned into my memory, and I knew there was no going back. Laura had betrayed me, and now I had to decide what to do about it. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly along the coast, the image of Laura and Dave replaying in my mind like a broken record. I felt numb, my emotions trapped somewhere between shock and rage. How could she do this to me? How could she throw away everything we had built together for some fling with a guy she barely knew? By the time I finally pulled over at a deserted overlook, the sun was starting to rise, casting a pale light over the ocean. I sat there, staring out at the water, trying to make sense of what I had seen. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the anger that was bubbling up inside me. I needed to do something. I couldn't just let this go, couldn't just confront Laura and expect things to go back to the way they were. She had crossed a line, and there was no coming back from that. If I was going to deal with this, I needed to do it on my terms. That's when the idea hit me. It was crazy, maybe even petty, but it was the only thing that made sense at that moment. If Laura was going to betray me so publicly, then I would expose her just as publicly. She needed to feel the humiliation, the pain, the betrayal that I was feeling. I grabbed my phone and started making calls. First, to the local TV station to inquire about advertising rates. The receptionist was cheerful, oblivious to the turmoil in my voice as she explained the process. I jotted down the details, my mind already racing with possibilities. Next, I called a friend of mine who worked in graphic design, asking if he could help me with something urgent. "James, are you sure you're okay?" he asked, clearly concerned by the tone of my voice. "I'm fine," I lied. "Just need this done as soon as possible." He agreed, and within hours, I had everything I needed. A simple image, Laura and Dave standing too close for comfort at the club, with the word affair emblazoned across the top in bold, red letters. It was brutally direct, just like the pain I felt. I sent the image to the TV station, purchasing a primetime slot during a popular show. The cost was steep, but I didn't care. This wasn't about money, it was about making sure Laura and Dave knew that I knew, and that everyone else would know too. As I hit send on the email confirming the ad, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It wasn't going to fix anything, and it certainly wasn't going to erase the betrayal, but it was something. It was my way of taking control, of not letting Laura's actions define me. I wasn't going to be the victim. I was going to be the one who walked away with his head held high. I didn't tell Laura about the ad. I didn't confront her or give any indication that I knew what she had been up to. Instead, I played along, acting as if everything was normal, even as the anticipation built up inside me like a pressure cooker. That evening, we sat down to dinner as usual. Laura chatted about her day at the surfing club, her voice light and carefree, as if nothing had changed. I nodded along, barely hearing her words, my mind focused entirely on the clock. The ad was set to air at 8:00 p.m., right in the middle of the most watched show in town. As the minutes ticked by, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Laura didn't seem to notice, too caught up in her own world. I forced myself to eat, to act natural, even as the moment I had been waiting for drew closer. Finally, the time came. I suggested we watch some TV, casually flipping through the channels until I landed on the one I knew would carry the ad. Laura didn't protest, settling in on the couch beside me, completely unaware of what was about to happen. The show was halfway through when it cut to a commercial break. I watched Laura out of the corner of my eye as the usual ads for cars and fast food played. She looked relaxed, her guard completely down. And then, it happened. The screen went black for a split second before the image of Laura and Dave filled the screen. Affair flashed in bold red letters, the accusation impossible to miss. It was stark, brutal, and unmistakable. For a moment, there was silence. Laura stared at the screen, her expression frozen in shock. Then, as if in slow motion, she turned to me, her eyes wide with horror. "James, what?" I didn't say a word. I just watched her, letting the reality of what she had done sink in. She scrambled for the remote, frantically trying to change the channel, but it was too late. The damage was done. She knew it, and I knew it. Her phone started buzzing almost immediately, a flood of messages and calls from friends, probably even from Dave. She ignored them, her attention entirely on me now. James, I can explain, she stammered, her voice trembling. But I didn't want to hear it. I stood up, feeling a strange sense of calm wash over me. I already know everything, Laura, I said, my voice cold and distant. You don't need to explain anything. She looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes, but I didn't care. Not anymore. I just wanted you to feel what I felt, I added. Now you know. Without another word, I turned and walked out the door, leaving her alone in the living room, the echo of the ad still ringing in the air. As I stepped outside, the cool night breeze hit my face, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. It was over. The facade, the lies, the betrayal, it was all out in the open now. Laura could deal with the fallout however she wanted, but I was done. I had my closure, and that was all I needed. I spent the night in a motel, far away from the house that no longer felt like home. The room was small and dingy, the bed creaking with every movement, but it was a welcome change from the suffocating tension that had taken hold of my life. I barely slept, my mind racing with everything that had happened. The ad, the look on Laura's face, the way she had begged me to listen. It was all a blur, a chaotic mix of emotions that I couldn't quite process. By morning, I was exhausted, both physically and mentally. I knew I couldn't avoid Laura forever, though. She had called and texted me countless times during the night, each message more desperate than the last. I ignored them all, but as the sun rose, I realized I had to face her one last time. We needed to have a final conversation, to close this chapter for good. When I arrived back at the house, I found Laura sitting on the front steps, her face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept either, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair a mess. As soon as she saw me, she stood up, a mix of relief and fear flashing across her face. James, she began, her voice trembling. Please, can we talk? I'm so sorry. I never wanted any of this to happen. I crossed my arms, keeping my distance. Talk, then. I'm listening. She hesitated as if searching for the right words. It was a mistake, she said finally, her voice cracking. I never meant to hurt you. I got caught up in something stupid. It wasn't real, James. It didn't mean anything. I felt a surge of anger rise up in me. It didn't mean anything? Laura, you had an affair. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and you're telling me it didn't mean anything? How can you even say that? Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached out to me, but I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me. I know I messed up. She cried, her voice desperate. I know I did something terrible, but I love you, James. I love you, and I'll do anything to fix this. Please, don't leave me. For a moment, I almost believed her. The pain in her voice, the sincerity in her eyes, it all seemed so genuine. But then I remembered the image of her and Dave on the beach, the way she had kissed him, the way she had laughed with him. Those memories were too fresh, too raw to ignore. I shook my head, my voice cold and detached. You can't fix this, Laura. What's done is done. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. She collapsed onto the steps, sobbing uncontrollably. Please, James, don't do this. We can go to counseling, we can work through this. I'll quit the surfing club, I'll never see Dave again. Just give us another chance. I looked down at her, my heart heavy with a mix of sorrow and resolve. It's too late, Laura. I'm done. I can't stay in a marriage where I'll always wonder if you're being honest with me. I deserve better than that. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, but I could see the defeat in her eyes. She knew it was over, just as I did. There was nothing more to say, nothing that could change what had happened. I turned away, walking toward my car without looking back. Laura didn't call after me this time, didn't beg me to stay. She just sat there, broken and alone, as I drove away, leaving behind the life we had once shared. The days following my final confrontation with Laura were a whirlwind of emotions. I filed for divorce, moved out of the house, and started the process of rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. Everywhere I went, I was reminded of the betrayal, of the life I had lost. But I knew that moving on was the only option I had. Staying would only prolong the pain. I didn't hear much about Laura after that. She tried to contact me a few more times, but I ignored her calls and messages. Eventually, she stopped trying, and I assumed she was dealing with the fallout in her own way. But I did hear plenty about Dave. The ad had done its job, perhaps even more effectively than I had anticipated. Word spread quickly through the small town, and soon everyone knew about Dave's affair with a married woman. His reputation took a nosedive, and the surfing club, once a popular spot for locals and tourists alike, became a place people avoided. Membership plummeted, and the business that Dave had worked so hard to build began to crumble. One day, I ran into a former member of the surfing club at a coffee shop. We exchanged pleasantries, and then he brought up Dave. "You hear what happened to him?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head, though I had a good idea of what was coming. "He's selling the club," the man continued, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Can't keep it going with all the bad press. No one wants to be associated with him anymore. I heard he's thinking of leaving town, starting fresh somewhere else." I nodded, sipping my coffee. It didn't surprise me. Dave had made his bed. And now he was lying in it. I felt no sympathy for him. He had knowingly crossed a line, and he was paying the price for it. But even as I listened, I realized something. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. I wasn't gloating over his downfall or relishing in his misery. The revenge had served its purpose. It had exposed the truth, brought everything out into the open, and allowed me to take control of a situation that had once felt completely out of my hands. But now that it was done, I realized that I didn't need to hold on to it anymore. I had made my point, and that was enough. A few days later, I received a letter from Laura. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to bring a sense of closure. She apologized again, acknowledged the pain she had caused, and wished me well in whatever came next. She mentioned that she was planning to leave California too, to get away from the memories and start over. I folded the letter and put it away, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Part of me was relieved, knowing that Laura was moving on and that I wouldn't have to worry about running into her. But another part of me, one I didn't like to admit, felt a pang of sadness. Not because I wanted her back, but because of what we had lost. The future we had once planned together was gone, and there was no getting it back. But as I walked out of my new apartment, the sun shining brightly overhead, I realized that maybe that wasn't such a bad thing. The life I had once envisioned with Laura was over. But a new one was waiting for me. A life where I could be happy again, where I could find peace and move on from the pain. And as I drove down the coast, the wind in my hair and the ocean stretching out beside me, I knew that I was ready for whatever came next. The weeks after receiving Laura's letter were a strange time for me. On one hand, I felt an undeniable sense of freedom. The weight of the past, of betrayal and anger, had started to lift. But on the other hand, there was an emptiness, a void where my marriage and the life we had built together used to be. It was like standing on the edge of a cliff, the vast unknown stretching out in front of me. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. It helped to keep my mind occupied, to avoid the quiet moments when the memories of Laura and our life together would creep in. I started going to the gym more often, spending hours lifting weights and running until I was too tired to think about anything else. But no matter how busy I kept myself, I couldn't ignore the fact that I was starting over. Alone. The realization hit me hardest on the weekends when I had no work to distract me. The silence of my new apartment was deafening, and I found myself driving out of the city just to escape it. One Saturday, I decided to take a drive along the coast. It was something Laura and I used to do together, but now I needed it for myself, a chance to clear my head and figure out what my life was going to look like moving forward. I drove for hours, the sun glinting off the water as I wound through the coastal roads. Eventually, I pulled over at a small, secluded beach, one I had never been to before. I walked down to the water's edge, the sand cool beneath my feet, and stared out at the horizon. The waves rolled in, steady and constant, a reminder that life goes on, no matter what. I closed my eyes, letting the sound of the ocean wash over me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of calm. As I stood there, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the revenge, the aftermath, it had all been a whirlwind of emotions. And I had been swept along with it. But now that the dust had settled, I realized that I had a choice. I could let this experience define me, let it shape the rest of my life, or I could move on. I could learn from it, grow from it, and start over on my own terms. I took a deep breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, I felt ready to face it. I had been through hell, but I had come out the other side stronger, more aware of who I was and what I wanted. And that was something to hold on to. As the sun began to set, I walked back to my car, a sense of purpose settling in. I wasn't going to let the past control me anymore. It was time to focus on the future, on building a life that was mine, and mine alone. The next few months were a time of rebuilding. I focused on myself, on my own happiness and well-being. I started exploring new hobbies, trying things I had never considered before. I took up photography, something I had always been interested in but never had the time for. I found solace in capturing the world through my lens, in finding beauty in the small details that I had overlooked for so long. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years as I focused on my marriage and career. It was good to be around familiar faces, to share stories and laughter without the shadow of the past looming over me. I even started dating again, slowly and cautiously, allowing myself to open up to the possibility of new connections. It wasn't easy at first. There were moments of doubt, of fear that I was moving on too quickly or not quickly enough. But each day brought a little more clarity and a little more confidence that I was on the right path. One evening, I was at a gallery opening for a photography exhibit. It was a small, local event, but I had been drawn to it by the description of the artist's work, images of the California coastline, capturing the raw beauty of the ocean and the land. As I walked through the gallery, admiring the photographs, I felt a sense of connection to the artist's vision. It was as if they had captured the emotions I had been feeling, the struggle and the hope that came with starting over. As I stood in front of one particularly striking image, a black and white shot of waves crashing against a rocky shore, I heard a voice beside me. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" I turned to see a woman standing next to me, her eyes focused on the photograph. She had an easy smile, and there was something warm and genuine about her presence. "Yeah," I agreed, returning her smile. "There's something powerful about it." We started talking, first about photography, and then about life in general. Her name was Megan, and she was new to the area, having moved to California a few months ago for work. As we chatted, I found myself opening up to her in a way I hadn't with anyone else in a long time. There was no pressure, no expectations, just a simple, honest conversation. By the end of the evening, I felt a connection with Megan that I hadn't expected. We exchanged numbers, agreeing to meet up again sometime, and as I left the gallery, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something new, something good. In the days that followed, Megan and I started spending more time together. We explored the city, tried new restaurants, and spent hours talking about everything and nothing. It was easy and comfortable, and I found myself looking forward to our time together. There was no rush. No need to label what we were doing. We were just two people enjoying each other's company, and that was enough. As the months passed, I realized that I was no longer defined by what had happened with Laura. The pain and anger that had once consumed me had faded, replaced by a sense of peace. I had let go of the past, and in doing so, I had opened myself up to the possibility of a future that was brighter and more hopeful. And so, as I stood on the same beach where I had once made the decision to move on, I knew that I had truly started over. The waves still crashed against the shore, just as they always had, but now they sounded like a promise of new beginnings, of endless possibilities. I smiled, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face, and walked forward into my new life, ready for whatever came next. Life with Megan was a breath of fresh air. We continued to see each other regularly, and our bond grew stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just that we got along well, we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. There was a sense of ease between us, a shared understanding that neither of us was rushing into anything. We were simply taking things one day at a time, and it felt right. Then, one day, something happened that I didn't see coming. It was a typical Friday evening, and Megan and I had planned to meet at a small, cozy cafe near the beach. I arrived first and found a table by the window, ordering our usual drinks. As I waited, I stared out at the ocean, feeling content in a way that I hadn't in a long time. When Megan arrived, she greeted me with a warm smile, and we fell into our usual easy conversation. But as we talked, something in the room caught my eye, rather. A woman had just walked in, her back to me as she approached the counter. For a moment, I couldn't place why she seemed familiar, but then it hit me like a punch to the gut. It was Laura. She hadn't noticed me yet, and I quickly turned back to Megan, hoping to avoid a scene. My heart pounded in my chest, and my mind raced. What was she doing here? I hadn't seen or heard from her since we had finalized the divorce. The last I knew, she was planning to leave California. Megan noticed my sudden tension and gave me a concerned look. James? Are you okay? I forced a smile, trying to mask my unease. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thought I saw someone I knew. Before Megan could ask anything else, Laura turned around, her eyes scanning the room. When they landed on me, she froze. For a moment, we just stared at each other. 1,000 unspoken words hanging in the air between us. Finally, she broke the silence, walking over to our table. James, she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. I didn't expect to see you here. Same here, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. How have you been? Good, she said, though I could tell it was a lie. There was a sadness in her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. I've been good. Just trying to move on. You know? I nodded, not knowing what else to say. This was awkward, to say the least. The last thing I wanted was for Megan to feel uncomfortable or for this encounter to dredge up old feelings. Megan, sensing the tension, reached out and touched my hand. Do you want to introduce us? She asked gently, trying to ease the situation. Of course, I said, grateful for her understanding. Megan, this is Laura. My ex-wife. Laura, this is Megan. Laura's eyes flickered to Megan, and for a brief moment, I saw a flash of something, jealousy, perhaps? But she quickly composed herself, offering a polite smile. Nice to meet you, Megan. You too, Megan replied, her tone friendly but reserved. There was a long, uncomfortable silence, and I could tell Laura was struggling with something. Finally, she sighed and looked back at me. James, could we talk for a minute? Alone? I hesitated, glancing at Megan. She gave me an encouraging nod, letting me know it was okay. Go ahead, she said softly. I'll be right here. Reluctantly, I stood up and followed Laura to a quieter corner of the cafe. She seemed nervous, twisting her hands together as she spoke. I didn't come here to cause any trouble, she began. I wanted to say that I'm sorry. For everything. I was taken aback. Laura, you don't have to. No, I do, she interrupted, her voice firm. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened, about what I did. And I know I hurt you in ways that I can never fully make up for. But I need you to know that I'm truly sorry, James. I never wanted things to end this way. I searched her face, trying to gauge her sincerity. There was no anger or bitterness in her expression, just a deep, lingering sadness. I appreciate that, Laura, I said finally. I've moved on, though. I hope you can, too. She nodded, looking down at her hands. I'm trying. I really am. It's just, seeing you with Megan, it made me realize how much I've lost. I didn't know how to respond to that. There was nothing I could say to make it better, to ease the pain we had both been through. We both lost a lot, I said gently. But it's in the past now. She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. I hope you're happy, James. You deserve it. Thank you, I replied, genuinely touched by her words. I hope you find happiness, too. We stood there for a moment, the weight of our shared history hanging between us. Then, without another word, Laura turned and left the cafe, disappearing into the night. When I returned to the table, Megan was waiting, a sympathetic smile on her face. Are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I said, taking her hand in mine. I'm okay. Just a little surprised, that's all. I can imagine, she said, squeezing my hand gently. If you want to talk about it, I'm here. I smiled at her, grateful for her understanding. Thank you, Megan. But I think I'm done talking about the past. Let's focus on the present. She nodded, and we continued our evening as planned. But the encounter with Laura lingered in my mind. It was a reminder of how far I had come, and how far I still had to go. The encounter with Laura stayed with me for days. I replayed our conversation over and over in my mind, wondering if I had said the right things and if I had truly made peace with what had happened. But as time passed, I realized that I didn't feel the same anger or sadness that I once had. Instead, I felt a sense of closure. Megan and I continued to grow closer, and our relationship became more serious. We spent more and more time together, and I found myself thinking about a future with her. A future that was different from the one I had once imagined with Laura, but one that was filled with possibility and hope. One evening, as Megan and I were sitting on the beach, watching the sunset over the ocean, I finally felt ready to let go of the past completely. The waves lapped gently at the shore, and the sky was painted with hues of pink and orange. It was a perfect moment, one that I wanted to remember forever. Megan, I began, my voice soft but steady. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, about us, about the future. She turned to look at me, her expression curious but open. What's on your mind? I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I've been carrying around a lot of baggage from my past, from everything that happened with Laura. But being with you has shown me that it's time to let go of all of that. I don't want to live in the shadow of what happened anymore. I want to focus on us. On what we have, and what we could have in the future. Megan smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. James, you don't have to rush anything. We can take things at our own pace. I know, I said, reaching out to take her hand. But I want you to know that I'm ready. Ready to move forward, to build something new with you. She squeezed my hand, her smile widening. I'm glad to hear that. I feel the same way. We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, just enjoying each other's presence and the beauty of the moment. The weight that had once felt so heavy on my shoulders was gone, replaced by a lightness that I hadn't felt in years. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The past would always be a part of who I was, but it didn't define me anymore. I had survived the pain, the betrayal, and the heartbreak, and I had come out the other side stronger and more sure of who I was and what I wanted. And what I wanted was Megan. A future with her, filled with love, laughter, and new memories. It was a future that I was finally ready to embrace. When we eventually got up to leave the beach, I knew that this was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. One that I was excited to write, one day at a time, with Megan by my side. We walked back to the car hand in hand, the sound of the ocean fading behind us, and as I looked at Megan, I knew that I had finally found my way forward. I had let go of the past, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Months passed, and the seasons began to change, bringing with them a new sense of warmth and renewal. Life with Megan had settled into a comfortable rhythm. We spent our weekends exploring new places, sharing quiet dinners at home, and dreaming about the future. The scars of the past had faded, replaced by a bond that felt unbreakable. One crisp autumn morning, we decided to take a hike through the hills overlooking the coastline. The air was cool and fresh, and the leaves were beginning to turn golden, adding a touch of magic to the landscape. As we walked along the winding trail, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Despite everything that had happened, I had found happiness again. Happiness that was simple, genuine, and real. We reached a scenic overlook, the ocean stretching out endlessly before us, shimmering in the morning light. Megan smiled as she took in the view, her eyes sparkling with the same joy that I felt in my heart. "This is beautiful," she said, her voice filled with awe. "It really is," I agreed, but I wasn't just talking about the view. At that moment, I realized just how much Megan had come to mean to me. She had been my anchor through the storm, the light that had guided me out of the darkness. And now, as we stood together on that cliff, I knew there was something I needed to do. Without overthinking it, I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Megan," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "There's something I want to ask you." She looked at me with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. "What is it, James?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. I've spent so much time trying to figure out what my life would look like after everything that happened. But now, standing here with you, I realize that I don't want to imagine my future without you in it. Megan's eyes widened, and I could see the realization dawning on her face. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. Her hand flew to her mouth in surprise, tears welling up in her eyes. I never expected to find love again, not after what I went through. But you've shown me that it's possible to start over, to build something new and beautiful from the ashes of the past. Megan, you've become the most important person in my life, and I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. I dropped to one knee, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring, one that I had chosen with care, knowing it was perfect for her. "Megan, will you marry me?" For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Megan stared at me, her eyes filled with emotion, and then she nodded, her voice choked with tears. "Yes, James. Yes, I will." I slipped the ring onto her finger, and she pulled me to my feet, wrapping her arms around me in a tight embrace. We stood there, holding each other, as the wind whispered through the trees and the waves crashed against the shore below. It was a moment of pure joy, a moment that I would cherish forever. As we finally pulled apart, Megan looked up at me with a smile that lit up her entire face. "I love you, James," she whispered. "I love you too, Megan," I replied, my voice filled with the depth of my feelings. More than I ever thought possible. We stayed there for a while longer, savoring the moment and the promise of a future together. It was a future that I knew would be filled with challenges and uncertainties, but it was also one that I was ready to face, as long as Megan was by my side. The weeks that followed our engagement were a whirlwind of excitement and planning. Megan and I decided to keep the wedding small and intimate, surrounded only by our closest friends and family. We didn't want anything extravagant, just a celebration of our love and the journey that had brought us to this point. As the wedding day approached, I found myself reflecting on how much my life had changed over the past year. There was a time when I thought I would never find happiness again, when the pain of betrayal felt like it would consume me. But now, as I stood on the cusp of a new beginning, I realized just how far I had come. The day of the wedding was perfect, a crisp autumn afternoon with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze. We chose to have the ceremony on the same beach where I had once made the decision to move on with my life. A place that now held even more significance. Megan looked stunning in her simple, elegant dress, her hair cascading in soft waves around her shoulders. As she walked down the makeshift aisle toward me, my heart swelled with love and gratitude. This was the woman who had given me a second chance at happiness, and who had helped me rebuild my life from the ground up. The ceremony was short and sweet, filled with heartfelt vows and promises of love and commitment. When it was time to exchange rings, I couldn't help but smile as I slid the band onto Megan's finger, a symbol of the bond we had forged together. I promised to love you, to cherish you, and to stand by your side, no matter what life throws our way, I said, my voice steady and sure. You've given me a new lease on life, Megan, and I can't wait to spend the rest of my days with you. Tears glistened in her eyes as she repeated her own vows, her voice filled with emotion. James, you've brought so much joy and light into my life. I promise to love you unconditionally, to support you in all your endeavors, and to be your partner in every sense of the word. I'm so grateful to have found you, and I can't wait to start this new chapter together. When the officiant finally pronounced us husband and wife, I pulled Megan into a deep, passionate kiss, the cheers of our friends and family ringing in our ears. It was a moment of pure bliss, a moment that marked the beginning of the rest of our lives. As we celebrated with our loved ones, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The pain of the past was finally behind me, replaced by a future filled with love, hope, and endless possibilities. Megan and I had found each other in the most unexpected of circumstances, and together, we had built something beautiful, something that would last a lifetime. That night, as we stood on the balcony of our small beachside cottage, watching the stars twinkle above the ocean, I knew that I had made the right choice. Life had thrown its share of challenges my way, but I had come out the other side stronger and more certain of what I wanted. And what I wanted was simple: to spend the rest of my days with Megan, building a life filled with love, laughter, and joy. It was a new chapter, a new beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take us. The honeymoon phase of our marriage was everything I could have hoped for, full of love, laughter, and shared dreams. Megan and I settled into our life together with ease, each day a new adventure. We traveled, explored, and made countless memories, all the while growing closer as partners and best friends. I had never felt more content or at peace. But as with all things in life, the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. One day, about a year after our wedding, I received an unexpected letter in the mail. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, and as soon as I saw it, my heart skipped a beat. It was from Laura. I hadn't heard from her since that day at the cafe. And seeing her name again brought back a flood of memories, some good, some painful, but all a part of who I had become. Megan was in the kitchen when I opened the letter, and I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should read it alone. But we had always been honest with each other, and I didn't want to keep anything from her. Megan, I called, my voice steady but curious. You might want to see this. She came over, wiping her hands on a towel, and looked at the letter in my hand. From Laura? She asked, her tone neutral. I nodded. I haven't read it yet. Go ahead, she encouraged, standing by my side. I unfolded the letter and began to read it aloud. Dear James, I've thought about writing this letter 100 times, and I never quite knew what to say. But now, after all this time, I think it's important that I do. First and foremost, I want to thank you for the conversation we had at the cafe. It was difficult for me, but it helped me realize something that I had been avoiding for a long time. I needed to truly let go of the past. Just as you have. I'm writing to let you know that I've moved away from California, just as I originally planned. I've started a new life in a small town where no one knows my story, and I'm finding peace in that anonymity. I've also sought therapy, something I should have done long ago. It's been a hard journey, but I'm beginning to understand myself better, and I'm learning to forgive myself for the mistakes I made. Most of all, I want you to know that I'm genuinely happy for you. When I saw you with Megan, I could see the love and joy you share, and it made me realize that you deserve that happiness more than anyone. You've always been a good man, James, and I'm glad you found someone who sees that and loves you for who you are. This letter isn't about seeking forgiveness or trying to reopen old wounds. I simply wanted to close this chapter of my life with honesty and integrity. I hope that, in some small way, it brings you closure too. I wish you and Megan all the best in your life together. You both deserve nothing but happiness. Take care, James. I'm grateful for the time we had, even if it didn't end the way we once thought it would. With sincerity, Laura. I finished reading and set the letter down, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within me. Megan looked at me, her eyes soft and understanding. How do you feel? She asked. I took a deep breath, considering her question. Honestly? I feel relieved. It's like the final piece of a puzzle has been put in place. I think Laura and I both needed this closure, and now we can truly move on. Megan smiled and took my hand in hers. You've come a long way, James. We both have. I'm glad she found her peace, and I'm even more glad that you found yours. I pulled her close, wrapping my arms around her as we stood there in our cozy living room, surrounded by the life we had built together. I couldn't have done it without you, I said softly. You've been my rock through all of this. And you've been mine, she replied, leaning into me. We're a team, remember? I smiled, feeling a deep sense of contentment. Always. That evening, as we sat together on the couch, sipping wine and talking about the future, I realized that the past no longer had any hold over me. The pain, the betrayal, the anger, all of it had been washed away by time and love. Laura's letter had brought everything full circle, allowing me to close the door on that chapter of my life once and for all. Megan and I continued to dream about our future, about the family we hoped to start, the places we wanted to visit, and the life we wanted to create together. It was a future built on trust, love, and the shared understanding that we had both overcome our own struggles to find each other. As the night grew darker and the stars began to twinkle outside, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. Life had taken me on a journey I hadn't expected, with twists and turns that had tested me in ways I never imagined. But in the end, it had led me here, to a place of peace, happiness, and true love. And for that, I was eternally thankful.